Well, welcome all. My name is Seth Green, and I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And we are thrilled to have you for this information session on an upcoming course, Truth, Disinformation, and the Media in this year's election. I'm going to take down the screen here so that you can see myself and, much more importantly, Eric Schurenberg, who is the distinguished instructor behind this course. And I should start by saying that we are so excited to have Eric in our community here at the Graham School, and he has been a part of it for a year, but he will be teaching his first full class this upcoming autumn, and we are immensely grateful for all the work that he has put into it. What we want to do over the course of this information session is talk about the upcoming course, why we put it on our catalog, and how it will be approached from our instructor's perspective. And so before turning it over and having a conversation with Eric and then answering your questions, I'll just share that our motivation for this course started with Eric hosting a major gathering here at the university that brought together journalists and people in this world of disinformation from across the country last autumn. It was a gathering that was viewed by all of the attendees as absolutely transformational to their understanding of these issues. And a number of people afterwards said, how do we bring this to the broader Graham School community? And we started a conversation about the possibility of a course that would look at these issues of media bias and bring some of these incredible journalists into an online space where you could engage with them. Then as Eric and I talked further, we thought, what better time to actually have these conversations than while an actual election season is playing out, and to talk with journalists as they're reporting in a time that is very difficult, because we'll talk about this in our conversation. People want to be looking at objective facts. They also want to be playing out both or even multiple perspectives from different political parties. And so how do you do all of these things at once in what is arguably one of the most chaotic news environments in our history and one of the most unique elections? And so, being the University of Chicago, we lean in moments where there is that kind of diversity of perspective and that kind of ambiguity about exactly how you seek truth in these environments. And then the way we leaned into this case is we asked Eric to teach and to bring his incredible network of people from across a wide array of news perspectives to come together to think about some of these questions with our learning community. So that is the context. And now I want to start by getting to know Eric a little bit. And Eric, people have seen your biography, storied career in journalism, leader at Fast Company and Inc., and a number of other publications. But can you talk about what led you to your interest in trust in media and what has led you to develop this lifelong learning course in particular?
Sure, Seth. And thanks, by the way, I had not really followed the evolution of this course. It's really interesting to hear the background of it before you finally came to me and proposed it. So I was, as my biography says, a business journalist, and I had a lot of leadership editorial roles at places like Money and Fortune and Business 2.0 and so on, before switching over and being an executive and CEO of Inc. and Fast Company. But my transition, I guess you would say, from being just a business journalist to caring about the whole state of the information environment, and particularly the role of professional journalism in it, happened on January 6th, 2021, which was a transformational date for many of us here, I'm sure. I realized then how toxic the information environment had become. It was no longer possible to deny that. And we saw it play out in one of the most dramatic and harrowing experiences in our country's history. And I thought, getting Americans back to a shared reality where we agree on sort of the fundamental facts and can work together to solve the problems the country has is the challenge of our generation. And as time wore on, as I thought more about this topic and began to talk to more people on my podcast, And as we wound through some of the lectures I did at the University of Chicago, I realized that the problem isn't just that there are a lot of bad people out there spreading misinformation. It's that the whole information environment has totally changed. It's so different from when I was growing up, and you need a new set of skills to navigate it. So it is both a kind of national challenge. We just have to sort of turn down the heat and layer on a sense of factuality to our political discourse. And also as individuals, we have a totally different world in which we have to kind of find our way through an avalanche of information to get at the truth. A job that used to be fairly simple and you could be very passive about it. Now you can't, or you will be misled. So that's sort of the origin of my interest in this topic, the creation of my nonprofit called the Alliance for Trust in Media, and what brought me to this course.
Well, so I know we just got to know you and an idea you had as we had this information session, and I know you're going to do this in each of your classes, so it's a role model for what's to come, is to get to know the people that are in this room for the information session. And you had the idea to kind of poll a few questions and compare those to some national data that you use in research in the Alliance. And so, yeah, I'll let you, kind of jump into some of the poll questions you want to ask. I'll launch them as you do so, Eric.
Okay. Well, the first question is just a kind of base setting question of where do you get most of your news? You can pick your top three, and here are the kind of the choices that we laid out. There are many different ways to slice up the media environment, but friends and family, online news sources, national mainstream news brands, broadcast TV, social media, conservative news sources like Fox or Newsmax, talk news radio, national cable news like CNN, MSNBC, CNBC. I think those cover it. And let's see where this particular audience gets their news.
So I'm going to end the poll with apologies for anyone who hasn't finished yet. And then I'm going to share back so you can see the results. And you will notice, maybe not an entire surprise, given that this is a very intellectually engaged audience, that national mainstream news brands and the national cable news seem to lead in this. And I mean, Eric, as you just briefly review this, how does that compare to the data on the country as a whole?
Well, this is a very learned group, and a group that's much more dedicated than the American population as a whole to traditional reality-based, if you want to say, but traditional mainstream news media. So you can see the number there, 83% get the top three, one of the top three sources of news is brands like New York Times and the Washington Post. In the population at large, that is only 9.5%. So be aware that compared to the other members of the electorate, you are better informed and particularly informed in a particular slant on the news. Social media, on the other hand, is a fairly large use, so 14% here, 9% for the population at large. Conservative news media for the population at large is 11%. It's not really a very large source of information for the people on this call. So everybody has a different news environment. Everybody is kind of in their own filter bubble, and getting to the truth means stepping out of that every once in a while. And that will be one of the things we'll emphasize in the course.
Well, so you have a second question you want to ask?
All right, so let's talk about that. How much trust do you have in the mainstream media to report the news accurately most of the time? This is kind of a yes or no question. Do I trust the mainstream media to get it right most of the time?
We'll take in your opinions and we'll acknowledge the existing bias that we go into this question with, because you're at 83% engagement with the national mainstream media versus the 9.5% that are cited on average in our country. We got quick responses on this, so I'm going to end this poll, I'll share it back. We're
Yeah.
about 3/4 of people on this are trustful of the mainstream media. Eric, what does that look like in a national context?
Compared to the nation at large, we have in this group much more trust in the mainstream media. One of the things that I found particularly harrowing about this poll, when Gallup issued it nationwide, was that for the first time ever, the number of people who said they had no trust at all in mainstream media rose to 38%. The number of people, the percentage of people who had a lot of faith or, a fair amount of faith was only 32%. So more people mistrusted mainstream media than trusted it. That's not a great indication for the media environment.
Your next poll question?
The next question is, let me see. Why don't you put it up? Okay. On a scale of 1 to 4, this is sort of a misinformation susceptibility test. How good are you on a scale of 1 to 4 at detecting misinformation? How would you judge yourself?
Great, very quick responses again. So I'm going to stop it and
Okay.
share back where we are. You'll see a lot of threes in the mix.
Now, if everyone was interpreting this correctly and you realize that 3 was, oh, I'm sorry, I've got it backwards. So where 1 is well below average, so no one sees themselves in that group, but most people see themselves in the in the 75th percentile or above, 50th percentile or above. And that does correspond to the average among Americans. But there's some very interesting differences. So 65% of Americans got 3/4 of the answers right on a Cambridge University misinformation susceptibility test. But there were interesting differences. Young people, so people from 18 to 30, only 11% scored in that level, whereas 50% of people over 65 scored very well. People who got a lot of their news from social media scored much worse than people who got their news from somewhere else. TikTok, for example, only 9% scored in the top quartile, and Truth Social, only 4%. People who got most of their news from the New Yorker, a third of them were in the top quartile. Anyway, so go on to the next question.
Yes, final question here.
And would you put that up, Seth?
For some reason, it's not allowing me to. Let me see if I can open it one more time here. Apologies to everyone who is waiting. So for some reason, I'm having trouble launching it. A poll is being shared. Okay. So hold on, I just have to end the poll that's being shared. For some reason, it's not allowing me to launch this. So maybe I'll ask it out loud with apologies. Okay. It is which of the following come closest to your belief? And I'm going to read this now so you can hear it out loud, perhaps. And then if you're willing to put in the chat your response with apologies, it's would have been easier with the last one. But Americans will survive no matter who is elected, but our reputation and economy could take a hit if we elect the wrong leaders. That's one view. Another view is choosing the wrong leaders in 2024 could end democracy in the US as we know it. So you could maybe put into the chat the word survive if you agree with the comment that we will survive no matter who is elected, or you could put in the chat democracy if you feel like that could end depending on what happens in this election. And we'll just keep our eyes here on what is a mix, actually, in order, it looks like. It's funny how the patterns here are playing out. But I mean, Eric, with apologies that we're very data-driven at the University of Chicago, and my methods here have failed us. When I read through what was about the first 50 responses, My estimation is we're pretty even here. How does that compare to the country at large?
Well, it compares pretty well to the country at large. So in a Syracuse Ipsos poll that asked this question, 48% of the respondents said that they thought democracy would survive with some potential downsides in foreign policy and the economy. 41%, though, so close to the margin of error, thought that democracy was at stake in this election. I thought it was interesting to bring up a question about the election in this particular panel because we are truly, in my opinion, facing a consequential election. Then, even if you don't think democracy itself is at stake, an awful lot is. And compared to other elections, including 2020, we are at the mercy of a flow of information from worthwhile and not worthwhile, malign and benign, that we have never faced before. Even in the 2020 election, there was considerable content moderation on the part of the social media platforms. That has all gone away. So for 2024, the idea that false information and harmful information, election suppression information would be stopped at the source, that's not going to happen. And then you layer in the role of artificial intelligence in the information environment, and you are in terra incognita. And that's why I think it's important to take this class. And I really do think that the idea of finding your way past all the noise to the truth in this environment for this election is crucial. It is a crucial 21st century skill.
Well, so let's talk about the how, because you've, I think, very artfully and powerfully engaged us on the why of this course. And it's the data we just reviewed in terms of where people get their news, how that influences how we see the world, and how it influences our understanding of key facts on which we vote and which we make other decisions. But this is a very difficult, in some ways, thing to approach intellectually, both because we have an audience here who already, in this case, knows a lot from the poll that we just did, and because we're very committed as a university, I know you are as an instructor, to looking at all perspectives and to finding bias, which happens on both what might be considered left-leaning or right-leaning media. So talk to us about your approach to the course and how you're going to teach this.
There are two main goals to the course. One is to help people understand the transformational, agonizing in many cases, changes that the media and news and journalism environment has undergone in the past couple of decades. I think you need to know that to understand why you're getting the news you're getting, the quality of news you're getting, the volume of news you're getting, and help you understand, the need to find your way to sources you trust and to always have your antenna up for biases and misinformation. So that's one thing, understanding the environment. And the second thing is understanding yourself. All of us have built-in mental shortcuts or psychological biases that make us susceptible to misinformation or make us prioritize information that flatters our own pre-existing beliefs. And to get to the truth, to be a good citizen, to understand the world you operate in, to be a good friend to people of different beliefs, all of that requires you to understand exactly what's going on in here as well as on out there. So that said, that's sort of the two main goals. The way the course will unfold is that each of the 10 courses is designed to answer a particular question that takes you on a journey through the election to understand what is going on and how to find out what is really true in the barrage of information you'll get. I should also add that each class will start with a review that we will all do of a prominent news story in the preceding week. and we'll analyze it for credibility, for sources, for bias, and anything like that that you can perceive, and we'll evaluate how credible, how truthful, and what it means to the election at large. Then we'll bring in a speaker who will help us answer those central questions. And then we'll break into breakout sessions we'll discuss what we've just heard from the prominent speaker, and then get around by the end of the class to what our answer will be to that question. Okay, so let's go through those questions if you're
Yeah, and
ready.
I'll
Beth,
actually
anything to
show
add?
the syllabus if that's good. I mean, not to
Good.
burden everyone, but this is the syllabus. We'll include this in the follow-up email. But maybe if you want to just talk about what are those, 10 questions essentially that you're asking over the 10 weeks. And then for those who are looking here on the screen, you can also see the pre-reading that is in addition to the weekly article that will be coming in real time.
So the very first question is maybe the most basic of the entire course is there such a thing as objective truth? And our speaker will be Jonathan Rock of the Brookings Institution, who's the author of The Constitution of Knowledge, which is the playbook, the Bible, if you will, for fact checkers around the world. It lines out in understandable ways kind of the principles of how we as a society have decided to settle questions about factuality or not. That should be fascinating, and Ralph is one of my heroes. The second class will be, the question we'll ask is, what's wrong with election coverage? And there are many things built into the incentives in the media business that make election coverage not necessarily, as it serves to you, the most useful thing for determining either truthfulness or how you ought to vote. And our special guest will be Nancy Gibbs, who was the editor-in-chief of Time magazine and is now the leader of the Harvard Shorenstein Center on politics, technology, and media. Class number 3. The question, media bias, left or right? The answer is yes, and both. And we'll have 2 speakers there, one from the left and one from the right. former CNN anchor Brian Stelter will talk about how he's found bias on the right. He's the author of a book about Fox. And Jonah Goldberg, very thoughtful editor-in-chief of The Dispatch, former commentator on Fox, will take the point of view, pointing out the bias built into news on the left. Week 4, we'll finally raise the question of technology and AI and how it's affecting the news that we're getting. And our guest there will be Julie Angwin, a New York Times columnist who writes about that subject, who's also the founder of Proof News, a digital online newsroom that talks about questions about technology and its effect on society. Week 5, we'll go into the question of how polarized are we really? How much do we really disagree with each other? And how much of it is a portrayal, a sort of a portrait of a demonization of the other side by the media and by social media and by people who profit from that kind of chaos? Our special guest will be Jocelyn Kiley, who's the director of public opinion at the Pew Research Organization. On week 6, we'll talk about the sprawling effect that social media has on perceptions, on the news ecology, and on the election. And here we're lucky to have 2 remarkable guests. First is Nina Jankowicz, whose role now is the executive director of the Sunshine Project, who was briefly the director of the Disinformation Coordinating Committee for the Department of Homeland Security, and also Yoel Roth, who had the very important role of Trust and Safety Director at Twitter before it became X. Week 7, we'll go into the minds of editors, newsroom producers, and the people who decide what actually goes out over news feeds. And we're lucky to have the former president of CBS News, Andrew Hayward, who's also done an awful lot of very important groundbreaking work about objectivity in the modern journalism world. We'll spend week 8 with the leader of a fact-checking organization, Angie Holland, who's the director of the International Fact-Checking Network. She is the founding of PolitiFact, and we'll talk about how it is that those organizations that specifically and for decades have counteracted rumors, how they decide what is really true out in the environment. In week 9, that is going to be the Monday before we vote, if you vote in the polls. And we'll ask the question there, what's the one story you need to read in this election season before you vote tomorrow? And we'll be led on that by the guest speaker, David French, the New York Times columnist, Dispatch columnist, the author of American Succession. He is a brilliant writer, but also an extremely fair-minded columnist, definitely one of my heroes, and I can't wait for that one. And finally, we'll wrap it up the Monday after the election is held. It'll be more of a debrief, understanding what happened and how we can expect coverage to change for the administration ahead. And there we have a panel made up of Julie Pace, the CEO of the Associated Press, Paul Farhi, who has been the media reporter for the Washington Post, and Isaac Saul, who is the founder of Tangle, which is a fast-growing part of the media ecosystem. It's a Substack newsletter that's grown like crazy because of Isaac Saul's distinctive voice. So that covers the course. In every week, we'll have the advantage of having these remarkable prominent speakers to give us their perspective on the question. And we will then have our chance to discuss the question and hopefully by the end of it, reach some kind of understanding about the question that we've posed.
Well, Eric, this has been an extraordinary explanation of your class, and even someone who is looking forward to it, I will acknowledge I'm even more excited about it now. And I just want to share how, truly grateful I am to have this at the Graham School, because I think this is an incredibly important conversation, how the media has changed, what it means for how we engage in civil discourse. We think about, we're a university that seeks truth. These are foundational questions, and you're putting them together amidst the chaos in a way that really allows us a structure to better understand, engage, and for some potentially even shape them as we look to the future. So immense gratitude. I want to come now to any questions that you all have. I'm looking in the chat and I'll start backwards. Joe Holmes asks about, and some of these questions will relate to maybe your expertise, some relate to the course. We'll take a few of them, and then we'll make sure if people have more questions, we can answer them via email. What about opinion pieces masquerading as news? And I don't know if that's something that will be covered. And I've seen some facts, you know a lot more about this, where it used to be that news was coverage, meaning, this happened, here's how it happened, and it was more factual in nature. That's expensive because you often have to have someone there. It's also, in a media environment like ours, it's hard to be novel because it's so quick to get some of those facts. So increasingly what we have is people that, you're turning on what's a newscast, but they're actually not giving you news, so to speak. They're giving you their opinion of what happened. And I don't know if you want to talk at all about what that transition looks like statistically and what that means for how we consume news now, where I believe we're consuming much more opinion than news in terms of that balance than we may have done in the past. Whereas, when I was growing up, you got opinion on the opinion page and that was it. Now it feels like it's everywhere.
No, that is absolutely true. And the statistics about what percentage of the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Boston Globe were 50 years ago compared to what they are now are shocking. So basically it was, and we'll have the correct numbers in the class, but it was on the order of 95% of what made the front page in those iconic news organizations 50 years ago was straight news, just reporting, just the facts. Now it's less than half. There are many different reasons that this has happened, and getting to understand that and what the incentives are for media organizations is part of understanding the environment in which you have to operate. So one of the things we'll work on is making sure that we can identify the difference between opinion, analysis, and straight reporting.
There's a question about how you look at social media. You had mentioned, there was more content moderation, and now in this election, we're moving away. I think we may be familiar with X, which has been explicit about that move. Are there others that you're thinking of that might be moving more away from content moderation in this election?
But Facebook has also explicitly moved away from any kind of content moderation. It has become, for a couple of reasons, a political football. And none of those platforms wants to be hauled before Jim Jordan for censoring, any kind of view that might be seen as political. And so there's no upside. These platforms are not, the common square. They are not Lincoln Park. They are profit-making organizations, and the path for them is to create more controversy and more outrage and keep people online longer. And content moderation, which was a kind of good corporate citizenship, has proven to be too much trouble. And so there just won't be much of it this year.
A few other questions in the chat that I'll answer. It will be recorded for those who need to miss a class and catch up. If you cannot fit this into your life, Karen Dorn asks, are there books or articles you would recommend? We're going to send the syllabus so that you can see that, and we absolutely want you to still learn about these things, regardless of whether you can be a student in this class. Eric's bigger hat is that he runs an entire nonprofit devoted to trust in media and better understanding these topics, so I'm sure he's with me on that one. And then we will have most of the articles and books mentioned with availability. There may be some that you need to purchase in order to review them, but we're working hard to limit that. I think we've gone through most of the questions that are here. Can we just maybe end, Eric, because we promised people 12:30, and I want them to know if they take this class, they will be on time, despite my leadership in this one making us a few minutes late. Can you just talk about any closing thoughts on, why you're excited to teach this class? Because, we talked in advance, and, you shared that this is not just a teaching experience for you, it's also a learning experience to be in a room with the group of people that are going to be thinking about these issues deeply and giving you a perspective of, an informed and educated audience. So there are some biases, but people that are typically coming from outside of journalism, but interacting with it and really trying to look at these questions as citizens and as people who believe in truth-seeking as a goal.
I think it's a cliche to say that the teacher learns as much in the class as the students. But one of the things I would say is that one of my realizations about true media literacy or true critical thinking or true mental immunity or all the other psychological terms that are used to describe kind of the same kind of ability to learn from others, not to hold too tightly to your own ideas, to constantly question what you believe and expose yourself to other points of view. That is sort of the crux of being a competent consumer of news in this crazy, chaotic, overflow of information, period. So I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives and learning from you about how you see the news. I've been inside the media industry for a long time, and so it's really, really valuable to hear what it looks like from the outside and how you're working through these problems, these challenges that we all share in this environment.
Well, Eric, thank you for your time today. Even more, thank you for bringing this class and this knowledge to our community and through your nonprofit to the world at large. And we look forward to having many of you in Eric's class this autumn. We think it's going to be a really meaningful and engaging opportunity to look at these issues in real time during a very real election. So thank you, thank all of you, and happy afternoon to all, or to all that are in the the Midwest and East Coast. Happy whatever time of day it is to everyone. All right, thanks so
All
much.
right. Goodbye, all. I hope to see you in the class.